And now I can get started on the body. An interesting thing about these early kits, which I showed before, is this separate roof piece here. These two screw holes hold the whole body down to the chassis, and then this one here is for adding additional weight to all that empty space that's inside, making for an extremely heavy model. This doesn't fit quite perfect, but it is pretty good, so it won't take much filing to get that a little more flush with the body. And I've now done some filing on the roof piece on both ends. I took down the middle just a little bit, but pretty much left the corners alone. That seemed to be just what it needed to sit in the body a little more flat. I mean, it's still not perfectly flush, but it is better. It'll never look perfect just because of the design. That may be one reason why they changed to a one-piece body later on. But that'll at least look pretty good once it's painted. One little problem with the kit, which was also noted by Model Railroader in their original view back in 1953, is that these two body mounting screws are a little too long, about 1/8 of an inch. So they don't hold the body down quite as well as they could. Now, while Model Railroader replaced the screws, I actually marked the length it needed to be and then really carefully took the end of it to a bench grinder. And then I used my knife here to even out the threads so it'll still go into the screw hole without any problem. Grinding the screws down that 1/8 of an inch was just right. They're nice and flush with the frame and hold the body on good and tight. And one thing I'll note is that the edges that actually hold the body down are only in the front and back. The middle is kind of free to go up and down, so you don't want to over tighten the screws or it'll pull that top down inside the body, and you want it to be flush. Now for the details, there are some parts I'll be purchasing and others I'll be making from scratch just to be a little cheaper. This here, which basically just looks like a blob of plastic as it is actually a headlight piece that I made from scratch. It's a piece of scrap plastic from a model kit. I glued it to the end of a Dremel and then turned it down to size so it'd be nice and round. And then while it was still turning, I took my razor here and just real carefully carved it out from the center until it had a nice cone shape inside. And then I glued a clear lens onto the front and filed it down to shape and glued a light bulb in there. So that should help that big open hole in the front look a lot better when the model is finished. And just so you know how it looks, there it is installed and all lit up. It's a 1.5 volt micro bulb. I'll be putting a directional lighting circuit together for that. So that turned out pretty well. The cast exhaust vent doesn't look too bad really, but that setup there isn't actually correct for Pennsylvania Railroad diesels. So I'll be drilling that out and putting a screen in. I got this screen here direct from the owner of Hobbytown. He still has some parts left for pretty cheap, so I picked up a few things. I'll use the cone shapes drill bit to take out most of this and then carefully file the rest down to shape. That seems like the best idea anyway. I'll mount that in there, and I'm thinking I'll put an actual exhaust fan underneath too. Let's see what I can do about that. Well, that was a job. I haven't had to do filing like that in a long time now. But fortunately, this round file really did a good job. And I think that turned out pretty well. The screen fits in there real nice. So now I'll just have to make some of the detail to go under it and then glue that in place. Now this part here was kind of tricky. This is the cross brace that goes under the vent. I made that from 2 pieces of wire. One of them I flattened it out right in the middle and then drilled a hole through, and then slid the other piece through there and glued it together as a single part before putting it inside of the hole. And once the screen set on top over that, you shouldn't even be able to tell that it's made of wire, especially after I get around to painting it. And that is now all glued in place. To do that, I took a wire and put a little droplet of super glue in there at a time, kind of spread it around the edges so that it wouldn't fill any holes. And this was a risky detail to do since I only had one shot at it, but it turned out exactly the way I wanted, and I think it was worth it. And now I'm working on the lift rings. To make them, I'll be using this ultra-fine wire that's left over from a Grant line switcher, and I'm drilling real tiny holes in the roof piece for it. All the lift rings are located on just in this one area, so that makes it a little easier. Now to drill them, I have to use this ultra-fine drill bit, and these things, they're made of steel, but at this size they're so flexible and brittle that you do not want to use a hand drill for something like this. You really want to use a motorized tool like this Dremel here. It could save you a lot of bits in the long run. Well, the best way to do this is before you start drilling, you want to make just a little tiny mark in the roof there where you want the hole. Just a little pinpoint to start the hole. And then you want to take something like 3-in-1 oil. Just get a little bit on the bit there. That helps it out with cutting through the metal. And then once you start, you just kind of ease the bit onto there and let the weight of it do the work. Don't push on it. And every now and then you want to pull it back out and clean bits of metal off. Otherwise it'll kind of clog up and the bit will get stuck. And there's one of the rings there. I'm bending these by hand, using basically whatever I can to get a good round shape out of the top there. And considering how small that is, that's pretty difficult to do, but it can be done with some careful bending. Alright, 2 down and 7 to go. These little parts are really time consuming for how little they seem to add, but every little bit helps. Well, there's what's left of the drill bit. It broke while I was doing the last hole, and it's so dull that I was having to push pretty hard to get the holes done. But I managed to use the tip of it and finish off the last one, so the rings are all on there now. One other detail I'll be doing are the antenna for the Pennsylvania Railroad. Again, these will all go on this one roof piece, making it a bit easier to work on. And the other ones I know who make these are Cal Scale, and they're pretty expensive for what you get. But they'll help it to look more realistic. I've got one side drilled so far. It only took a few minutes to do it. Using the larger bit was a lot easier. It went through nice and quick and made some clean holes. So now I'll just put the antenna in and the 0.02 inch brass wire, and I'll solder those together for added strength. Okay, I've got the antenna all in place now. They're soldered together and glued to the roof. And I made the one come down here based on some reference I found. And I actually have the wire separated right here and just slipped into that hole. So the roof is still removable, and then when I reassemble it I can just slip it back in there easy enough. One detail I'm adding is the radiator fan. I had to make the fan there from scratch. The center is a piece of scrap plastic that I turned down to the right size and shape needed. And then I made those blades out of sheet plastic and have a brass wire under each one to give it a little more strength and mount a little better to the center. And one unique thing I'm doing is I'm motorizing it with this tiny motor that I got out of a laptop CD drive. It's just got a simple belt going to the blades, And those turn it pretty well. And here's to show how it'll look when it's running. It's not perfect, but it still looks pretty good in there. That'll help it to look a little more interesting while running down the track, instead of just having the usual stationary fan like most HO scale models. Yeah, I think that'll help it turn out to look pretty cool.